Hello, everybody. How you guys doing today? Tired? Yeah? Thanks for sharing day 4 with us. Appreciate it. How was the party last night? Everybody survive? Everybody half asleep? I wouldn't blame you. Well, my name's Kevin Holland. I'm part of the Healthcare Solutions team here at VMware. I'm from the Mid-Atlantic region of the US, and I'd like to welcome you to our session today. It's SDDC5260, Reducing Costs and Increasing Availability in Healthcare, Customer Stories in the Software-Defined Transformation. So pretty excited about this session today. I think up until now, you've probably seen a lot of sessions on the how, right? How do you go about using technology? How do you go about using vSAN, NSX? How do you flip the switches, turn the knobs? How do you architect it? How do you engineer it? How do you make sure that it stays up once it's in production, right? That's all great, really important stuff. Today, we're going to kind of shift the focus a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the why, right? Why is it relevant? What is the business impact? Having worked in healthcare for a long time, IT for 12 years, I've spent a lot of time engineering and architecting solutions, and I know that I had, in my previous life in operational IT, focused so much on the solution, right, making sure that it would work, that I didn't often think about how to tie it back to the business. So today, we want to spend some time talking about how to apply these technologies to solve real-world business challenges and the benefits that you can experience when you adopt new technology. All right? So here's our standard disclaimer for the event. I'm sure you've seen that a couple times. All right, so joining me up on stage here, we have Jordan Wise from Lancaster General Health. We also have Dave Miller from Baystates Health, and my colleague Scott Carpenter, who is an SE with VMware in our healthcare vertical up in the New England area. So as we look at the agenda, we're going to focus about 5 minutes just on the macro pressures in healthcare. One of the interesting aspects of my job, working only within the healthcare vertical, is I see customers who have nearly identical challenges across the board, right? So we're just going to spend a little bit of time talking about them and then tying that back to the technology that can solve those problems. Then we're going to move into kind of a conversational piece. Jordan and I are going to talk about how Lancaster General Health adopted virtual SAN as an attempt to reduce the overall cost of storage in their organization. I'm going to hand the presentation over to Scott, and he and Dave are going to have a conversation about how they use software-defined storage and NSX as a way to solve availability challenges within having 3 physical data centers, but looking at it from one logical data center. And then we're going to close it out with some key takeaways and have some Q&A. So I think we'll be good on time here. We should leave about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. If for some reason we run out of time and you don't get an opportunity to ask your question, we'll make sure that we're outside the hallway and we can answer your questions one-on-one after the session's over. Everybody good? Everybody still awake? Nodding heads is good. All right, I'll take that. I'll take that. Oh, maybe I won't. This is what I get. There we go. Hey. So, again, like I said, having the opportunity to work with so many healthcare organizations, I see a lot of trends. So what are some of those trends? So if we look at the trends that are increasing, right, we're seeing this increased need for higher quality of service, increased business expectations, availability, responsiveness, performance, right, flexibility. We need to make sure that infrastructure and applications are easily accessible, that they're available all the time so our clinicians can get the data, access to the data that they need in order to provide great patient care, right? And that's a trend that's going up. Increased governance, right? Increased compliance, a focus on security. Everybody wants to keep their PHI truly private. Nobody wants to get on the front page of the paper because information has been leaked out. And now they have to pay fines, and they have brand damage, all those really bad things. We try to do whatever we can to focus on security and compliance. And that's more of a focus point in healthcare today. More applications. Not only the back end, but your consumers are used to this, right? They're used to being able to download applications on demand, getting access to the information that they want or need, right? Another trend going up. And then more devices and more servers per user. How many of you work in healthcare and are familiar working with physicians? Lots of hands. So did they just have one device? No. They probably have a tablet, and then they have a phone, and then they have their clinical desktop that they roam all over the place with, then maybe one in their office. So there's all these devices, and guess what? They expect an appropriate experience per device. So there's more things we have to manage. This is more complicated there. So all these increases, but then we get to support, right? All of you really smart guys. Most organizations that I work with, they're not getting more headcount, at least on the infrastructure side, as expectations increase. And in some instances, I've seen actually, as people leave through attrition, the business puts a critical eye on that position and has to determine, am I going to get enough value out of it? Many cases, I see people actually losing headcount, right? So it's a challenge. And then to add insult to injury, decreasing budget. So now you're telling me, okay, I have to have all these higher expectations, the same level of staff. Oh, by the way, you have less money this year than you had last year, right? I think this is a common trend. I mean, are you all seeing this somewhat? Okay, I'm getting some nods, and I'll take that. So if we look at this, you look at the blue area, you can look at that and we recognize we have a problem, right? We have a challenge. Now, we can look at that and we can be scared, and we can say, time to go into a different industry, right? Or we can take this as an opportunity to innovate and transform. All of us in here are engineers and architects, right? We solve really hard problems for a living. That's what we do. This is just another problem, right? So how do we go about addressing this problem? I would suggest that the best way to do that is to go software defined, right? When all of you started your virtualization journey years ago, you did that because it reduced cost. And it did so on the compute layer, right? You could fit more virtual machines onto a host, and you could share those resources, and then you could string those hosts together, and then you would have the ability to have extra high availability, all kinds of great things. And now we can take those very same concepts, right, and apply them to storage and network and security, elevating the intelligence up into software and letting the hardware do what it does best, right? Doing throughput, sending packets, all those really important things, right? So it's great to talk about this in theory. However, today what we wanted to do was have you hear from people who have actually already done this. This isn't just theory. This isn't just something that you could just theoretically do. We have customers who have actually done this in the real world. I'm going to bring those stories to you today. So, Jordan, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. My name is Jordan Wise. I work for Lancaster General Health in Pennsylvania. We're a 550-bed hospital. I design and architect data center solutions, SAN solutions for the healthcare industry. I've been doing it for about 17 years. I'm really happy to be at VMworld. This is my first time here, and really enjoying the energy.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming out. When we talk about challenges, and I think this goes for everybody, when we're looking at storage, right, there's more data than ever before, right? Not only, data that's in your EMR, but PACS imaging, there's more images than ever before. Those images are of higher quality than ever before, right? So, and now, we've talked about this before. Most of the information that you have to hold on to is for 7 to 25 years. Sometimes it's indefinite.
Can be.
Right? So you need to take care of it or you need to hold on to it for a long period of time. And because of that, capital and operating costs to hold on to all this data, they're sky high, right? And I think the other thing that we've talked about before is, it's difficult to kind of forecast what the business actually needs, right? And because the business doesn't really know what they're going to consume over the next year, it's kind of a challenge to go and figure out how much that's going to cost, right? So trying to figure out and forecasting has been somewhat difficult.
Yeah, things are changing faster and faster. Design and life cycle and prediction times are faster and faster. There's greater expectations.
Oh, sorry. Here we go. Slide. There are the challenges. Forgive me. So let's talk a little bit about the technical challenges that LGH in particular was running into in terms of providing that storage to the business.
Sure. Yeah. So as a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar, traditional SANs are a great tool. They work very well, but they are expensive. They're difficult to replace. They're difficult to add space to. When you're faced with ever-increasing design cycles and expectations on you trying to use those traditional SANs in multi-use environments with multiple performance profiles, it takes time. It's very difficult. The RFP process to get that sort of equipment is long, and that really slows you down from being able to design and deliver a solution quickly.
I think one of the other things, that's a challenge as well is, it's gotten a lot more complicated than it was in the beginning. It was, tradition just block level storage, but now as the needs for more capacity have continued to grow, different types of storage arrays, for packs, write once, read many type of, storage arrays, slow disk, fast disks, flash arrays for high performance. There's lots of different profiles for that data, so it's much more complicated than it used to be as well.
Yeah, I mean, designing a system in a healthcare environment and delivering that and finding out that SAN space isn't there for you to use and asking that project to take on a whole new array or huge amounts of money, multi-million-dollar deals, it doesn't work out. And I'm sure some of you have gone through that before, but you can't take these large step-level jumps in SAN storage and fit them into small and large projects with multiple performance profiles. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and finance doesn't really like getting a $1 million problem that's on their desk out of nowhere.
Who's going to pay for it?
Yeah, exactly. So, you were looking at some expansion in last year, and as you're looking at the expansion, trying to provide storage for all these individual projects and for packs and everything else, you decided to take kind of a closer look at alternatives, right? So, what were your steps in kind of identifying the appropriate type of storage for your environment?
Yeah, so we need to provide the storage, and it needs to be well-performing, it needs to be financially sound, and it needs to be operationally useful for our staff. So we have our traditional SANs, which we're used to, and we know how all that stuff works. We know how they go in, we know what they cost. We have the newer flash-based arrays, which provide increased performance, but they still have some of the same issues as a traditional SAN. You still have large jumps in cost to get higher capacities. You still have large initial investments to get those things on site. And then we had virtualized SAN, vSAN, which was very new when we first started looking, but it solved a lot of the problems that we were looking for, and it looked like we could use that and dovetail it into our current virtualized environment. It seemed on paper like a good fit, at least something that was good to look into as an option to solve our problems. Yeah.
So, I think that kind of the next step, you went through some, thought experiments, trying to figure out financial impact. Can you talk a little bit about the process that you went through to validate and make sure that which one of these options was right for you?
Sure. Yeah, so with virtual SAN and with the flash arrays, we really had to figure out, are these solutions going to provide the performance that we need, the flexibility that we need, and are we going to be able to use them and take care of them at an operational level? So we did a lot of whiteboarding, a lot of pre-planning. We looked into references and other information that was out there to try and determine, if we could build a robust design and convince our financial and upper management that taking a step into a more risky environment and something that we have never used before, and frankly not too many other people had used before, it was going to be a good step, was going to be a sound business step to do.
So in the end, you really decided to approach this very methodically, trying to make sure that not only from a performance perspective, from an operational perspective, but from a financial perspective, that it was responsible. So can you talk about, in the end, as you started to look deeper. There were 3 options that you looked at, and you wanted to compare and contrast.
Sure. So when you're looking at a virtual SAN environment, you have a couple of different options. What we ended up looking at was a hyper-converged option, which with Cisco UCS equipment, where we had all of the nodes of the vSAN cluster kind of managed centrally, which gave some good advantages. Another option we looked at was white box servers with top-of-rack switches to really reduce costs, but you increase the complexity in the management because each node is a separate entity in that vSAN cluster. And we looked at traditional SAN, which, as we talked about before, has some disadvantages that we were trying to get away from, but we understand how it works, we understand what it costs, and the organization has an appetite for that sort of thing. It ended up a hyper-converged architecture for us on an x86 platform with vSAN, provided us that really smooth linear growth upward. It provided us flexibility, and it allowed us to manage it in a central fashion, gave us some good advantages in that case, and it really provided the best cost-performance ratios.
Yeah, so when you were looking at the 3 different options, what specifically was the result, specifically from a financial perspective, in choosing these 3 options?
So the hyper-converged option ended up being about 60% the cost of a traditional SAN, and that's not even including the compute resources you get from a vSAN environment. We've been talking about storage this entire time, so vSAN nodes provide storage based on the number of drives that you have available, but we haven't even been talking about the fact that you can run VMs on there as well, so you're getting that whole advantage on top of it. So the hyper-converged architecture is what we went with.
So it was 60% of the traditional SAN, which you'd already known. But then again, the next year you're gonna have to go and replace your hardware anyway. Your hosts were gonna go end of life. Yeah. So when we look at it from that perspective, it was kind of like a 2-for-1, really reducing the storage cost and giving you compute out of that same portion of your budget. From a forecasting perspective, or I should say, from an expansion perspective, how did your leadership react to the fact that, hey, with expanding, I know that I could expand 1 block. That block was going to have 256 gigs of RAM, 10 terabyte of storage, and it was all for a fixed cost. How did they react to that versus the big step that they would typically have to do with the SAN that would come from out of nowhere?
It was positive. I mean, healthcare, as I'm sure other organizations are, is very risk averse. We like to do things the way we've done things. We have some very critical data, and nobody wants any hiccups. So just those advantages still necessarily were not enough to knock the ball out of the park. But by doing our homework and figuring those sorts of things out and showing the fact that we can add X number of terabytes for a small cost, drop that node into an existing infrastructure, and move along, it really made a big difference in the argument and in the convincing.
So after you went through the analysis, you selected vSAN, went on the hyperconverged, right? Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about as you went through the migration process, what were the things that you did? Because this is a new technology, right? I mean, this is something that was new to you. You'd never done it before. Yep. And every time we do a change, right, there's elements of risk. I mean, let's be honest about it, right? But there are ways that you went through, or there was a process you went through that helped mitigate some of that risk to ensure that you wouldn't have an unfavorable result. So you can talk a little bit about what you did there?
Yeah, I can. So you don't want to be the guy who presents something, an idea that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars and runs your entire infrastructure and have it not work out. So you really want to beforehand kind of figure out a way you can measure things, a way you can prove to yourself and to everybody else that what you're doing has a really good chance of success, and that things are going to work the way you've been explaining them to work and the way you've been selling the design. So we looked at IOPS of the SSD drives that were going into the vSAN to determine the performance levels we were going to get per node. And that's because of the way vSAN works. It was a really simple way of figuring out performance and figuring out what you're going to get, and also how you can expand that sort of thing if you try to put more load onto it than you would otherwise. So then we looked at vSAN best practices. I read the whole vSAN book just to get through all that. We looked at the HCL to make sure that our systems were going to meet the exact specifications for VMware's use cases. We also pushed VMware Professional Services to give us best practices and to build the system, to the way that it was supposed to be built, so that we could have your full support going forward.
And so you went through the entire project, and can you talk a little bit about where things stand now? Like when you started to migrate things over, what did you start with?
Yeah.
Where did you end up? What's the future?
Yeah, so we took a very pragmatic and careful approach. We started with test and dev, pretty standard, just to see how everything was working. Once we got the array stood up, once we got test and dev working and we were happy with it and everything was great, we moved actually a really large enterprise data warehouse system in production onto the boxes, 7 terabytes, maybe 30,000 IOPS, and everybody was happy. Our DBAs were happy. The performance was better than we expected. After that, we started moving forward now that we were comfortable and confident, and moved production on. Right now we have 40 plus Epic, our electronic medical record system, Windows servers running on our production vSAN, replicated across 2 data centers. And next steps, we're going to start moving our tier 1 systems over there as we start to sunset some of our older VMware compute resources and move to vSAN. It's been a linear but a really accelerated and really successful process.
So if there was one key takeaway that you would want to share with people in the audience who have not necessarily gone down this road yet, what would you tell them?
Yeah, so going through this as early adopters and going through this having never done it before, we did have some pain points. And the way we could have eliminated that was really to do your homework, to make sure that your hardware is supported by VMware, that your hardware vendor supports what's going on, that they support the level of ESX and vSphere that you're going to, that your drivers are all up to date and they're supported by vSAN. Sounds like a lot, but really if you plan all that out beforehand and you get all that put in place, not only will you have a much smoother ride and things work really well, but you can also push these guys to support you because you've done everything they've told you to do, and all of a sudden they're on your side to fix it as opposed to you against them. So we were fortunate to have that support, and it really made a big difference. And if you do hit a hiccup, you can work through it together. But I really think that now that this has been around for a while and there's so much published out there, that you can really take a prescriptive approach to go down through the checklist and have a successful implementation.
Great. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Scott?
Excellent. Thank you, and congratulations, Jordan. It's a great success, and appreciate you sharing that real-world success story of using vSAN in production with business-critical applications. Certainly, if you've been in healthcare for a while, Epic is a name that most people know, and putting those workloads on there is a pretty big statement.
There's some pressure, yeah.
So I'm Scott Carpenter. I'm a systems engineer out of the Boston area. I've been with VMware for over 7.5 years and been focused on healthcare and the top providers in the Boston area for over 5 years. I'm also a member of the Office of the CTO. It's about 100 employees that comes from all of the field-facing organizations, so all of professional services, all of pre-sales, all of our global support services, so GSS. There's about 100 of us, and through that program I work to connect our customers directly with the developers that create our software, as well as with our product managers setting direction. So if I can ever be of assistance with anyone who wants to work with people in development on a particular project, I'm happy to do that. And I'm happy to be joined on stage today by Dave Miller to talk about what they've done at Baystate Health. Dave, could you share a little background about yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you, Scott. I'm Dave Miller. I'm an architect at Baystate Health. I've been in IT healthcare for 38 years, and I've been at Baystate Health for 28 years. I've worn quite a few hats there, mostly in the performance, availability, protection, and capacity areas.
Excellent. So maybe just to help the audience, can we give a little background on who's Baystate Health and what communities do you serve?
Sure. Baystate Health is a 5-community hospital, level 1 trauma center. It's the biggest healthcare provider in the western part of Massachusetts. About a $2.5 billion business and well over 12,000 employees. In 2 of those hospitals that we've just recently purchased in the past 12 months. So big lot of growth,
Still growing.
still growing.
So, and congratulations on 28 years. That's
Thank
a
you.
wonderful achievement. In that 28 years, I know you've seen a lot of change, but just particularly in the last few years, we've seen some pretty key changes at the senior leadership level. Can you give a little background on that, please?
Sure. In 2012, we took on a new CIO, and about a year ago, we took on an interim CTO, who we like to call our renter CTO. They both brought a nice, refreshing, outside-looking in point of view to kind of zero in on some of the challenges that we all knew existed, but were kind of felt like our hands were tied to fix. So they were there to help and brought a nice new point of view.
So those fresh eyes coming in brought some old conversations, I think, back to the table. Maybe share with the audience, what were some of those key technical and business challenges that they noticed?
So one of the first things the CIO that we engaged with us on is the budget process. We budget for infrastructure by application needs. So if there's a new application, we help them budget for a new server. But those little one-off purchases made it difficult for us to deploy infrastructure with paradigm shifts, if you will, in bigger chunks. So it made it difficult to really kind of get out of the vicious circle we were in from an infrastructure deployment.
Excellent. And I think there was some focus around how people were spending their time.
Yeah. So the couple other things I had wanted to point out is that we also over-provisioned, so that app budget always had was able to. Sorry, lost my train of thought. The app budget was always able to fund the server for 3 to 5 years. So we'd purchase a server, would sit on the floor, would be using 10, 20% of its capacity for the first couple of years. The other thing that he called out, the CTO called out, is we had way too many proprietary platforms. And of course, the other thing that CIO focused on is he noticed that for the past, kind of since the economy started tanking back in 2008, our BC and HA and DR side of things has really been underfunded.
Yeah, we see that. I don't think that's uncommon, unfortunately, as the IT budgets have been constricting in healthcare. That HA, BC, DR budget has been something that's commonly been kind of cut, and so that obviously brings certain risks to the organization. So with this fresh assessment and acknowledging these technical and business challenges, and Joel Venko, your new CIO, setting a new strategic vision for where they wanted to take the organization, what were some of the key opportunities or desired end states that they really wanted to build towards?
So Joel, the CIO, if I pointed out his main priority in this regard, it would be to really drive down how much time our smart folks spend on keeping the lights on. He wanted to really look at a way to get them moving more towards growth and transformation initiatives, and drive down how much time they have to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
A couple other things that I would call out that they felt were important, both the CTO and the CIO, of course, is predictable, linear component level scaling, and of course hyper-converged. The CTO is big on hyper-converged commodity x86 software, more of on commodity x86 hardware, and with a software focus, and try and drive a lot of that proprietary, expensive stuff out the door.
Makes sense. So new CIO, new CTO, they do this assessment, project is formed, right? I think it's called Infrastructure 2.0, or I 2.0, sometimes abbreviated. So as you were looking at this new project, maybe just give us a background. What did you have to work from a data center perspective?
Okay, so we were fortunate enough to have 3 data centers in our metro area in Springfield that were tied together with dark fiber and DWDM infrastructure. So we have a number of 10 gigabit pipes between those 3 data centers at our disposal. And with about well under 50 microseconds of latency.
Excellent. So 3 sites, pretty close proximity, very fast, low latency network. And for those that don't have 3 sites or maybe don't have that low latency, please stay with us because we're going to talk about a solution later that can enable you to get the same type of outcomes that Baystate's achieving today. So on top of these 3 sites, and before Infrastructure 2.0 project had kicked off, there had already been research and a decision around the compute side. People have been trained. So on top of this physical data centers, what was known at the outset of the project from a physical compute and network perspective?
On the network side, Cisco has been in our shop for 30 years, so that was kind of a no-brainer, right? On the compute side, about a year or 2 ago, we had invested in UCS to displace a lot of our legacy Datacenter and rack-mounted stuff. The guys were happy with it. There's a lot of experience on the floor with it. So it was a natural fit for us. And it also, while we weren't zeroing in on hyperconvergence at the time, we knew it would be a good fit at some point.
Excellent. Okay, so we've got 3 data centers. We're going to use Cisco for compute and physical network transport. And as you mentioned before, your senior leadership was really, I guess, warming up to this concept of software-defined and moving more things into software as that made sense. From a teaming perspective, how did you organize the teams and what process did you go through to determine what additional technology components were going to make sense for Baystate?
So the first thing the CTO did was form the office of the CTO, and along with many other things, one of his main goals in establishing that was a choke point for infrastructure spend. I didn't mention earlier, but we were asked to tackle this without any additional CapEx ask, so a big challenge, right? So we, we scrutinize all infrastructure purchases, do the risk assessment, try and make sure that last straw isn't hanging over the camel's back to drop it, and make sure we're diverting as much of that CapEx over to the Infrastructure 2.0 initiative as we can. So that was big. We established Tiger teams with leads and champions of the various technical areas of the hyperconvergence project, and who will be expected at some point as this grows out to help train their peers and get them on board. And then we obviously tackled a lot of market research.
Excellent. So you had the overarching office of the CTO helping with strategic direction and reviewing, while you had deep subject matter experts that really knew, say, storage or networking, compute, and so forth, that could really help you determine the right solution. So based upon that market research, what were the technology components that you selected, and why were they right for Baystate?
So 3 main areas to hit, right? Hypervisor, vSphere was a no-brainer for us. It had been in our environment for 10 years at least. We had a lot of experienced and smart guys that knew that environment, so that was a piece of cake, right? On the network side, we chose NSX. We did some market research. NSX, in our mind at the time, was the only enterprise-ready, had a lot of market traction, and to us, that was a natural fit with vSphere. And at the time, while we were kind of laser-focused on getting that layer 3 stretch between our 3 data centers, we also knew that things like microsegmentation and some of the other cool NSX stuff would be pertinent down the road. Then on the storage, on the software-defined storage side of things, that's probably the one that we spent more time doing market research on. We did go with vSAN. I would say probably the 2 most important reasons we went with vSAN were, one, it was the only one we found out there that was going to meet our 3 data center requirement. You need synchronous between those 3 connections for the availability that we were trying to achieve, and vSAN was the only one that could do that. The other thing that we observed is, as I said before, we weren't bringing in proprietary hardware, so it had to be software-based. All of the other software-based solutions we looked at chewed up a lot of cores, whereas we felt that the overhead that vSAN has, where it's baked into the kernel, was a lot more efficient than burning a lot of cores. And then the third point, or the last point, for all three of those selections is it's all socket-based licensing. So everybody, I'm sure, has had challenges with capacity-based licensing. We were determined not to have to tackle a product that used capacity-based licensing.
Excellent, thank you. So in this configuration, what Baystate's doing is essentially stretching a vSphere cluster across 3 data centers. On top of that, we're leveraging NSX, and that played a really critical role initially for that layer 2 over layer 3. So each of those data centers are a separate /21 subnet. So there is no layer 2 adjacency, so we leveraged NSX to be able to provide that layer 2 over layer 3 adjacency, because when we stretch that cluster across those 3 sites, that means something like a DRS or a vMotion, that virtual machine can move to that other site, and we needed that application to still be accessible and fully functional. On top of that, as was mentioned, we leveraged vSAN, right? Again, integrated, so local storage being surfaced as a shared storage for the virtual infrastructure through vSAN. And one of the capabilities that was really important for us to be able to do this was a new feature that was released with vSAN 6.0. That feature is known as fault domains. Fault domains was primarily developed for customers that were running vSAN in a single data center, but had hosts that were in a cluster spread across multiple racks. And what failure domains was designed to do is give you the ability to group those hosts that were in a given rack but spread across multiple racks, to be able to group those like hosts on a rack basis, such that in a failure to tolerate situation of 1, where you have 2 replicas in a witness, you'll ensure that one of the replicas is placed in one fault domain, another replica in another fault domain, and then the witness is in a third domain. Therefore, you can lose any single fault domain, and your vSAN cluster continues to be available. So what we were able to do in Baystate's case, based upon their very low latency across the 3 data centers, is we were able to stretch that vSphere and vSAN cluster across the 3 sites, and we leveraged the fault domain capability to be able to indicate and group the hosts that were in each data center and group those into a fault domain. So Dave, now that infrastructure 2.0 has been built, you're going out and meeting with the different application owners and team leads. How is it that you talk about infrastructure 2.0 to the application owners?
So we wanted to proactively get our application folks engaged with this effort. There's well over 300 apps to migrate into the new infrastructure. It will cause some pain to the apps folks as far as their time commitment and whatnot. So we wanted to pick a couple of points to drive home with them when we go out and talk with them. Hopefully let them know that this is going to make their lives easier in the long run. So the first one that we convey to them is that this deployment is really one big logical data center. So they no longer have to worry about where their application is running. And then the other basic point we convey to them is that no more IP address changes. So if there's a server that fails over to another data center for whatever reason, or if there's upgrades or whatever the case that causes IP address changes today, that makes a lot of work for everybody, that'll be a thing of the past in this environment. Simple point, but big for the apps folks. And then the other thing that I convey to them with that next slide is, again, very basic, but it rings home with the apps folks. If that middle data center goes away, the apps that were without any involvement from them, the apps that were running in the data center that bit the dust, so to speak, migrate to one of the other data centers, and no IP address change, no hoops and whatnot to jump through for the apps folks. So those points ring home with them.
Yeah, I've even experienced in other customers where, even within a single site, not all clusters have access to all VLANs. And even just moving an application from one cluster to another, maybe decommissioning an old cluster, and they want to move those workloads to a new cluster with newer hardware, that requires an IP address in some customers' environments. So, in this environment where really the goal was to have high availability built in, right? No manual intervention.
Absolutely.
So you lose a disk, you lose a host, you lose a site, vSphere HA is essentially automatically going to restart those workloads. And to your point about, no IP address changes, that layer 2 over layer 3 with NSX is giving that application mobility and portability without any changes.
You got it.
And I know you mentioned, the NSX, the micro-segmentation is kind of an add-on, but it reminded me Tuesday morning, the interim CTO, Mike Feld, at the security conference, and he said how they're approaching security is essentially building it into the infrastructure. So instead of it being a bolt-on or an afterthought or trying to go out and buy a lot of different add-on components, is really trying to build security into the infrastructure. And I think, that was clearly from the outset availability, and that BCDR was a key capability we're looking to build into the infrastructure and just have that be a part of the definition of what you get when you run workloads on Infrastructure 2.0. I know that, that's kind of the next wave is really, further expanding with the micro-segmentation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So Infrastructure 2.0 has been built. It's in the environment, it's running. I know that your team's done some benchmarking with Oracle Swing Bench and so forth. Can you talk some about what are the workloads that the team is targeting to run on this?
So aside from the benchmarks that we are working on, we have some apps that we picked for what we call a proof of design. We tried to take a cross-section of applications across those 300 plus and make sure that we're hitting the main components, if you will, of what makes them up. So for example, one of the apps is PeopleSoft, so it uses web front ends, it uses things like WebSphere, it has an Oracle back end, and then that same philosophy with half a dozen other apps that kind of run the gamut of what we have on the floor today. The other variable in what we chose or will choose to migrate into here up front are some of the legacy apps and legacy infrastructure that really are pain points for us today, back to trying to make sure we're diverting CapEx spend to this new infrastructure and not having to invest in the legacy infrastructure. We're going out and looking for apps that chew up a lot of that old legacy infrastructure and causes grief today, and migrating them in first. So that's the two main variables.
Both from a compute, like say on the AIX platform, as well as on some of the existing storage
compute
arrays.
And we've got plenty of big metal storage arrays that have some challenges, and rather than invest in them, we'd much rather invest the money in the Infrastructure 2.0 environment.
Excellent. And I think, I know we've had some conversations with the team around Exchange 2013.
Exchange is in there, VDI will be in there soon. We're kicking off an initiative for that. So really across the board.
Yeah, so production workloads are targeted for there, so pretty important workloads.
Yep.
Through both the PeopleSoft, the Exchange, the VDIs, that's going to be used by thousands of clinicians that are delivering patient care, so important workloads.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah. So, it was definitely a pleasure working with you and your team through this project. I can remember a few times the requirements changed, and the one that kind of comes to mind, I guess, most easily was, I think when we started out with the project, we were going to use 3 sites, and then during the project, the requirement changed, you were going to use 2 sites, and then further into the project, back to 3 sites again. But I guess the reason why I want to bring that up is one thing I noticed is, as those changes in requirements occurred, what I noticed really about your team was progress didn't stop, right? Steady progress was maintained. And even though the goalposts were moving, things kept moving and never came to a stop. Can you talk some about, I guess, the culture, or what do you think it was that was happening in your organization that allowed your team to kind of accept those changes in requirements, but to keep things moving forward?
Sure. Now, this sounds a little intuitive, but to me, it's basic, right? We have support for this initiative from the very top of our organization, the CIO, and even above the CIO, right down the food chain, if you will. In addition to that, our CTO I won't call it preaching, but he instills in us it's okay to change your mind. If you have a problem to solve, you have a logical argument, you have facts that back up the logical argument, then let's change our minds, move forward, and get it done. And the two simple concepts, but I think they go a long way for making success.
Well, I can say, I mean, clearly things changed and your team handled that well, and I think that culture and that mentality that you know, that he brought to the organization and the professionalism you had within your teams and with your vendors, I want to say thank you on behalf of VMware. It was great working with your team.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you, Dave. Appreciate you sharing that story with us. So I did mention earlier when we were looking at that slide regarding Baystate Health's physical data center that, you know, if you don't have 3 sites and you only have 2 sites, say, or maybe you have higher latency than what Baystate had, you've probably already heard about it, but if you hadn't, great announcement was made at VMworld this year around vSAN and being able to do stretch clusters. So if you have 2 sites there and up to 5 milliseconds of latency between those sites, you can also do a stretch vSAN configuration in that and get much of the same, essentially, you know, the same benefits that were talked about business continuity and vSphere HA being built into essentially the infrastructure, as well as getting that mobility of applications, being able to vMotion them, whether that be proactively. It does require, because these are vMotions going across sites, that you need to have layer 2 adjacency, right? So NSX is not a requirement, but it certainly makes it makes a lot of sense, particularly if you're a vSphere customer. And with the security, particularly in healthcare that we're seeing, I think that microsegmentation is going to be a huge benefit for a lot of organizations. So just want to make a mention on that. So key takeaways, I think, from both of these case studies is, you know, vSAN is production ready, right? It's being used in healthcare. It's being used for business critical applications such as Epic, going to be using for PeopleSoft or for Exchange. VDI, right, being used to deliver patient workloads. And so, you know, it's a platform that delivers performance, it delivers high availability, but at a lower cost than traditional options, right? So I think that's the key takeaway around vSAN. And then with NSX, getting that portability, right, that BCDR, being able to move those workloads, that layer 2 over layer 3, as well as the security aspects of it, right? So now your firewall rules, they become essentially a property of the virtual machine. So as that virtual machine moves in the environment, those firewall rules move with it. So a lot of flexibility and really moving to policy-based management. In both instances, I know you had mentioned professional services and working with VMware professional services, and I know we worked with your team as well. I think you both highlighted that professional services is really important, particularly from a design aspect at a bare minimum, it's very important to get that design right, to make sure that it's going to be able to deliver the results that you're targeting out of that new infrastructure. And then I think the last point, we could probably talk for a whole nother session on, but you know, there is some transformation you got to recognize, right? When you bring in new technology and now some of the lines are blurring a little bit between storage and virtualization, network and virtualization, right? There is some skills augmentation, some skills transformation. So it's definitely important, I think, to be talking about that within your organization as well and planning for that. So next thing I just want to do, obviously this is the last hour of the VMworld session, so you can't go see these now, but I put them here as a reference because we obviously don't have enough time in an hour to do a deep dive on all the technologies we talked about. But I wanted to put them up so you can, you know, come back later, watch the recording. But these are some great sessions. There are many more. This is by no means all of them, but these are some great sessions that you could watch later on when the recordings are posted from VMworld to give a much deeper dive into a number of the topic areas, and particularly around the stretch cluster and high availability that we talked about. So with that, that concludes the prepared portion of our presentation. On behalf of Jordan, Kevin, Dave, myself, I want to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time to come here today and to listen to these great real-world case studies and what is being achieved in healthcare with VMware software-defined data center. We would really appreciate it. I know you have a lot of things to do, probably you know, getting on the way home and so forth, but if you could take the time to fill out the survey and give us your honest feedback. We do plan to try to do this again in the future, and we'd like to be able to improve upon that. So with that, what we'd like to do is open it up to Q&A. We're up here. We also have some members of the Baystate team and the Lancaster General team. I think Ryan's here as well. So, hey, Ryan, thank you. So there are other members of both Lancaster General as well as Baystate if people have questions around what they're doing and what they've achieved. But thanks again. There's a microphone right there if you wouldn't mind, just so the other people hear it. Or if you, I can repeat it if you want.
Yeah, I was just going to ask hardware and how many hosts Lancaster Health has. We're from Virtua on the East Coast as well.
Yeah, sure.
Like
so we have two
do your
data
similar
centers.
setup.
We have 16 nodes in the one data center and 6 in the other. It's all UCS hardware, C-Series 2U rack mount servers. Each one of those has 3 SSDs and 19 SAS drives. So we get about 18 to 20 terabytes and maybe 60,000 IOPS per node.
It's great.
Yeah, it's been great.
No complaints?
Once we got through the initial setup and got the drivers right and got everything working, we're actually buying new nodes for the next fiscal year to add on. As we're getting new projects, we're doing Exchange 2013, a huge implementation of that, and we said that wasn't part of the original design, so we don't have the specs for it. But since we've already been buying these things, here's the quotes to buy them. You need 3 more. When they come in, we'll just
Add them to.
you drop them in, you'll come up to the fabric interconnects for UCS, drop the templates in, install ESX, and put them into vCenter, and you have the capacity, both compute and storage.
And how long was it for you guys to buy the hardware and to start to get it set up?
It wasn't bad. If you're used to UCS, which we've had UCS with blade chassis for a while, it wasn't really any different. It was just a matter of the biggest challenge is getting the virtual NIC cards set up. So you're going to have your management, your vMotion, your replication, your vSAN traffic, and all that stuff in 6 virtual paths with different VLANs so that you can manage that traffic. Once you build that out in a template, it's just a matter of dropping that into each one and then doing host profiles to add that networking and all those VNICs in to the hosts once they're in vCenter. It's really not very difficult once it's set up.
It's great. Thank you.
How you doing? I'm Edo Lenu. I'm one of 4 infrastructure architects at Sloan Kettering. So we're just starting our vSAN implementation, like literally next month. I heard you talk about you have Epic running in that environment, and then at our hospital, we kind of let the vendor steer us. So Epic says, well, this is the hardware that we certify, and this is what you're going to use. How did you get them to put it on vSAN?
Yeah, so what you're saying is very familiar. We've gone through that exact same thing in the 6 or 7 years. We've had a relationship with Epic where they kind of push you towards what they're used to because it provides them with an easier time in supporting you and dealing with issues. What we've been successful in doing is doing our homework, looking at what makes sense for us, and then having frank conversations with them about, this is what we want to do, this is why we want to do it, this is why we feel we can do it, and we'd like you to work with us going forward. The risk in that is that if you do have an issue, they're not going to be as helpful, but I feel like if you've really vetted out the solution, that's really not going to come up. So we have Windows hosts right now running on Epic. Our primary Epic cache database is still running on an AIX platform, although we're looking at Red Hat in the future. Our primary Clarity database is still SQL running on physical hardware, but we're looking at the possibility of running that also on a vSAN in the next version. And we're going through those conversations with Epic right now, the same sort of thing. This is what we're going to do. This is what we can provide. These are the IOPS. We want you to stand behind us, and they have so far.
And is your environment, you say your infrastructure, so do you handle networking and compute, or is networking a separate group?
So networking has traditionally been a separate environment. However, with the hyper-converged architecture now, that line as Scott talked about before, is really blurred. So we still have dedicated network guys that take care of the core switches and the closet switches, but we do our own networking inside of UCS, and we do our own networking inside of vCenter. So as we move towards NSX, that's going to extend even further, and hopefully they'll partner with us, and we'll all work together on the same thing.
Yeah, at our installation, we have a separate network group, so they actually have their own vCenter, they have their own installation, they're actually testing NSX. And they were concerned, they wanted to learn more about it because they felt when we stand it up, then they would understand what we're going to do. But we're taking a different approach where we're saying, well, we can give you permissions where you manage NSX. We're not going to manage it because you're the experts in networking. And it helps to bring them along, into better receiving it.
Yeah, well, hopefully both of our methods will work out well. I mean, we're all going to have to work together in this brave new world. So you can't segment anymore, in my experience.
Well, the storage is another story because it's not. We have our infrastructure. We have hundreds of hosts, but there's just 4 of us.
Yeah.
And we do everything from. We don't just manage the hosts. We build the infrastructure. We build and we're HP. We tried UCS, and we went back to HP.
Yeah, well, I can tell you from my experience being a storage admin and a VMware admin that setting up the HBAs in UCS and hyperconverged is a world better. There's no cabling. It's already all set up. You have trunk lines.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. It's just that we're a large HP shop, and we recently started using OneView, which is equivalent to UCS's, what do they call it, the data center level management, and it's a 1.0 and it acts like a 1.0, but that's something outside of my choice. It's something that management decides. So, but thank you. I'd like to see if I can get some contact information, and you guys can maybe help us along with our implementation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Hi guys. So I got a question. Did you guys use a leaf and spine design in your core of your network for this to
So
happen?
for our vSAN UCS arrays?
Yes. From
Yeah,
your
so-
FIs from your FIs up.
Yeah, so we have 4 LACP links that go directly back to our core, 4 10 gig links in each data center. So the Fabric Interconnect has 40 gig right back to the core.
So was it a leaf and spine spine design? Do you guys know? Is it, which means, yeah, I guess from what I understand, all the leaves are connected to all the spines. And was that a design in the network?
I'm not quite sure, but we really just have the main core switches in each data center, and then the UCS environment connected directly back to that. So I don't think that's leaf and spine, but
Okay.
it's just aggregated switch ports. So we have 2 aggregated A ports and 2 aggregated B ports, and then the Fabric Interconnects in UCS talk back through those through a converged environment. So there's a primary and a standby connection for each of those.
Got it. And also, did you guys use just, was this actually a brownfield deployment or a greenfield deployment, or a mixture of the two while you deploy this? What was it like?
For this environment, it was greenfield. It was all brand new.
Brand new? Okay.
We also did a vSAN deployment in 5.5 for our VDI environment, and that was already running. So we have had experience with both retrofitting vSAN into the VDI environment that was running, and also building this new vSAN 6 and vSphere 6 environment, all new hardware, all new software.
Got it. It was all 6.0 pretty much?
Yep. Yeah, we were one of the first professional services deployments for 6.0 in both.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the same for Baystate. It was Greenfield version 6.
Yeah.
We needed 6 on the vSAN side for that fault domains, so that we could get that kind of site awareness.
Okay, so for Baystate Health was a greenfield deployment.
Yeah, it was Greenfield.
Yes.
It was Greenfield deployment, and it's been 6 since the beginning. So one of the first NSX, I think, designs that was done on NSX with vSphere 6 as well. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm with Honor Health out of Phoenix, Arizona. So the business wants active across 2 data centers, and we're kind of struggling to put all these pieces together. We're a brownfield deployment right now, and we have FlexPods pretty much, Cisco UCS, and NetApp backend storage that they already bought. 80-40 nodes replicating with each other what they want to do, but we're trying to figure out how to architect it right with VMware to see if this is going to be possible for us or not. But that's great that you guys achieved it with vSAN. And we already have some remote sites that use the VCSA, the old vSAN.
Yeah.
And they're cruising along. We just didn't know that vSAN is as powerful as it is from what we understand. But congratulations, guys.
Oh, thank you. And if you didn't catch it, so there is a new 2-node option with vSAN 6.1 as well. It does require a witness in another site, so it is kind of 3 sites, but there is a 2-node option now too if that was something that was preventing you from moving off the old VSA.
Yeah, awesome. So that's a question for you. So do you think, I mean, obviously there's a lot of questions that we have right now. Do you think active-active may be possible with NetApp, NFS storage? You know, there's a lot of hands in the pot, a lot of decision-making, but we're trying to see if this will be possible going forward. Do you
So what I would recommend is, you know, from a vSphere Metro Stretch Cluster perspective, there are specific options out there. There are KBs that talk about what are the specific solutions that have been, I guess, you know, validated or approved for a vSphere Metro Stretch Cluster configuration. I believe NetApps is referred to as Metro Cluster storage. I don't know how that plays specifically into the FlexPod, to be honest, but you know, I know, you know, NetApp certainly has a supported vSphere Metro Stretch Cluster configuration. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll be around. If others have any questions, feel free to come up. Oh, you got a question? Yeah, please.
So since we're on the subject of stretch clusters, we have an SVC stretch cluster and an IBM SVC, and we're thinking about going to vPlex as a stretch cluster. So how do I go back to management and tell them that this big SAN with all these drives that can replace each other if drives fail isn't as good as having 7 drives or whatever in a box, or 21 drives in a box with these separate failure domains?
Yeah, so traditional SANs do provide you with that security kind of feeling that it's been architected and it's all kind of a black box that's just going to help you out if there's a hardware failure. The nice thing about vSAN is that same architecture is going on. From my experience, you can lose drives, you can lose whole hosts. The data can be replicated. It is replicated by default to multiple locations, and you can increase that to even more locations to increase your data depth. So you can lose more hosts, you can add more fault domains. On top of that, you can add capacity a lot more quickly and add on more hosts, add more fault domains and more copies of the data. And that's done on a per VM basis. So if you have VMs that you want to protect more than others or be more economical in other places, you can adjust that out.
I think in both cases, there was some level of hardware refresh, right, that was being faced with some of the hardware, or at least I know at Baystate. Were you facing any hardware refresh? Or?
Yeah, we have SANs that are going end of life, and we also have VMware compute nodes that were going end of life. So we run a vPlex right now, and it works really well with our VMAX storage and that sort of thing. But with vSphere replication and vSAN, we saw all those same capabilities at a lower cost.
And I think that's, so I guess what I was trying to get to is, I think what I've seen so far, what really kind of pushes that conversation isn't so much the technical merits. The technical merits support it. It's usually looking at the financial side of it, of what are you facing from a refresh situation, or maybe it's an expansion. I know sometimes like in VDI, I've seen VDI projects be killed with traditional SAN storage because it requires such a large investment up front in order to get the storage you need, where that, I think you talked about, you both talked about, I think that linear scalability where you're buying the storage with the compute, it's just a different financial model. And then, you know, as you pointed out, the technical merits that you can get, you know, equivalent types of availability from the vSAN as well.
So what you're saying is the hardware, security on the hardware ends up being about equal?
I believe it does, yeah. Having run in both, we run both of those types of systems in our environment at the same time. There's no scenario that I can think of where a VMAX or a any sort of traditional array is going to perform better in a disaster or a hardware issue than a vSAN cluster running 6.
What about losing 2 drives in the same host?
It's still not an issue because what ends up happening is your VMDKs are replicated to 2 different physical hosts at a minimum. By default, you can move that up, I think, up to 7 if you want to use up that kind of disk space, but you can lose whole hosts. We actually had to move our vSAN array in one site, 16 nodes across the room, which was awful, but basically we had to shut down nodes and get everything brought down, and as we were shutting things down, the device was compensating, and all the VMs stayed up until we got down to 3, at which point we had to shut them all down and then move it. So we basically ran it through its paces and dropped 16 nodes down to 3, and everything stayed up.
Thank you.
Thank you. So vSphere HA kicked in to restart those VMs in that situation with no manual intervention. All right, we've been given the time, so we will be around if there are additional questions, and thanks again for coming and all the great questions. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Safe travels home.
Thank you.